never knows how you come across somebody once in a while you shouldn't have messed with. That's me.
I am not an African American.
You're Oreo cookie, white in the inside and black on the outside.
I don't have an afro, I have an Amerifro.
Talking that idiotic stuff you talk about, I will slap you.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Black as the ace of spades, but 100% American.
Heard around the world by everybody and their mama. The Jesse Lee Peterson Radio Show.
Uniting the races with truth instead of dividing them with lies. We're also rebuilding the family by rebuilding the man. Welcome to the show. I am Jesse Lee Peterson. I have with me Dr. Abraham Twerski, rabbi and psychiatrist specializing in substance abuse. His first opening, Gateway Rehabilitation Center in 1992, as a 28-day alcohol and drug dependency treatment center in Pittsburgh. It has since expanded and been named one of the nation's top 12 rehabilitation programs in a survey conducted by Forbes magazine and called one of the best treatment centers in Rehab magazine. I saw a YouTube video of the doctor, and I wanted to talk to him about anger, forgiveness, and resentment, because I believe that if people can do that, they can be free overnight. Dr. Twerski, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with me.
My pleasure.
How did you come to understand the seriousness of anger and resentment?
I think the moment of insight occurred a good number of years ago when one of my patients, who had been a very successful attorney, corporate attorney, and he was a very severe alcoholic, and he recovered from his drinking and was doing quite well. And then he was engaged by a number of people to start a profitable corporation. And at that time, he was essentially destitute because he had lost everything to his drinking. And so they engaged him to become president of the corporation. And they were supposed to start out a series of a number of retail outlets. After he started off the first 3 retail outlets, they were successful. The group got together and they fired him. And he realized that they had exploited him. And he was, again, destitute. He met me one day, and I asked him, I said, Hal, how are you standing up under this? And he said to me, I am full of anger and bitterness and resentment for what they did to me. But I will carry all of this to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous tonight, because you see, doctor, if I will retain that angerness and bitterness and resentment, it will drive me to drinking again.
Yeah.
Now, I left that conversation with the realization that here is a person who realizes, he's aware of the destructiveness of hanging on to the anger and bitterness and resentment, even though they were justified. Right? And I wondered, how many people are there who hang on to feelings of resentment and anger and are not aware of how destructive they are? Right?
Yeah.
Now, what I learned from this man was that he found it necessary to get rid of this resentment and anger for his own safety, for his own welfare. He couldn't care less about the people who had hurt him. He didn't want to forgive them in order to do them a favor. He had to get rid of the feelings of anger and resentment for himself.
Right.
And I thought that it's time to try and get across the idea that to forgive someone is not because you want to do that person a favor. And some people will say, I will never forgive him. He is a scoundrel. He doesn't deserve to be forgiven.
Right.
I said, you may be right. So don't do him a favor. But don't walk around with the feelings of anger and resentment in yourself. Either if it doesn't drive you to drink because you're not an alcoholic, it may cause you to have high blood pressure, heart disease, digestive diseases, arthritis, migraine headaches. Many of these feelings have been demonstrated to be fueled by anger and resentment. I said, so don't do the person a favor. He doesn't deserve to be forgiven, but forgive him for your own sake. And that's why I wrote the book, Forgiveness.
That is great. And you're right, forgiveness, don't let resentment hold you captive. Is there a difference between resentment and anger?
Yes.
What is the difference?
All right. First of all, I have variously described 3 stages of anger. The first stage is when somebody provokes you, somebody offends you, somebody hurts you. You don't have any choice at that point. You have to feel anger because that's natural. It's just like, in fact, if you don't feel anger, there's something wrong. Because if somebody stabs you with a sharp instrument and you don't feel the pain, you better go see a neurologist and see what's wrong with you. Right? So the feeling of anger when you're provoked is natural. You can't avoid it. However, the next stage is, how do I react to anger? Right? And I call that rage. Now, rage does not mean flying off and throwing things, but any kind of reaction, how I react to anger, I call rage. Now, that is under my control. I may not have any control over whether I feel anger or not when provoked, but I certainly have control as to how do I react. Do I keep quiet? Do I walk away? Do I sulk? Do I yell at the person? Do I throw something at him? Do I shoot him? All of those are options that I have. So no control over the initial feeling of anger. I can control my reaction. And then the question is, even though I cannot avoid feeling anger when provoked, how long do I hang on to it?
Hold that thought. Let me take a quick break. 888-7753-773. 888-77-JESSE. Back in a moment, folks. Very interesting.
You never know no one like me. Up there in your high society. They might tell you I'm no good. Girl, they need to understand just who I am. There might be a little dust on the bottom, but don't let it fool you about what's inside. There might be a little dust on the bottom, but it's one of those.
That's me, white on the inside, black on the outside. I am Jesse Lee Peterson, talking about resentment and anger and forgiveness with Dr. Abraham Twerski, a rabbi and a psychiatrist specializing in substance abuse. He is the owner of Gateway Rehabilitation Center. We're going to tell you how to get his book, Forgiveness. Don't let resentment hold you captive. Don't let resentment hold you captive. A lot of people are doing that. Doctor, you were explaining the difference between anger and resentment. Yeah.
Okay, so let's recapitulate. Anger is the feeling that you get when someone provokes you and you have no choice. That's a natural feeling.
Right.
How you react, that's something that's within your control. And then the wise King Solomon in his book of Proverbs says, anger rests in the bosom of a fool. Meaning, if you let it sit there, then you're foolish.
That's for
and
sure.
I heard it best expressed at a meeting with Alcoholics Anonymous, or one said, hanging on to a resentment is allowing someone whom you don't like to live inside your head without paying rent.
I love that.
Right. And I don't want to be that kind. Why should I let that guy occupy? He doesn't care what I think about him. I'm the one who suffers.
That's right.
So getting rid of resentment is self-preservation.
Is resentment something that you can overcome yourself, or is it a spiritual thing that God has to remove from you by your willingness to forgive others?
That's a good question. I believe that there are things with traits within ourselves that we can work on, but we may not be able to totally extirpate them. And I know of some very pious people who never manifested anger, but they prayed fervently for God to remove their anger from them because they couldn't do it themselves.
Right.
And that's one of the steps of recovery, is that when we discover our character defects, we try utmost to improve upon them, but ask God help to remove them from us.
I had anger for a while in my life, and I wasn't like really one of those people out there just really going off, but it was kind of secretly hidden within me because I had this resentment for my father and mother. My mother, who has tried to turn me away from my father when I was a kid, and my father for not standing up and taking hold of me. But I didn't know it was resentment because it felt like emotional love. I've noticed that when you have resentment, you become a very emotional person. So I had what I thought was love, and it wasn't until I asked God to let me see what was wrong, he showed me that resentment, that unforgiveness, and he caused me to forgive them. And I went to them and apologized for resenting them, and I've been free ever since, and that's been like 25 years ago. That's why I ask. And I know a lot of people want to forgive, and they have tried to forgive, but it's not working. And that's why I ask, is it something that has to happen by way of God, or can you do it yourself?
Yes, but in the recovery program of the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, we say we became ready to have God remove the character defects, which means that we have to do a little bit of our own homework. And there is something that we can do to try and get rid of resentments, even though we may not be totally successful. Like, for example, giving a person the benefit of the doubt. We have no idea why people act the way they do. Sometimes we condemn people and we're angry at them, and only later do we find out what the circumstances were that caused them to act that way. And I think that if we give people the benefit of the doubt and realize about ourselves that sometimes we have done something because of the circumstances that we were under, and we regretted it later, and we hope that people would have the presence of mind to forgive us.
That's right.
So we should extend that same courtesy to others.
How can people recognize when they have resentment or anger? How do you recognize that within yourself?
Well, I think it's quite simple. I think we can quite easily recognize what are our positive feelings and what are our negative feelings. And if we feel a negative feeling toward anyone, then I think we have to stop and think about why. And, of course, one of the things I wrote about in my book was that our subconscious mind is very clever and can do all kinds of tricks upon us, and we may have feelings that we are not even aware why we feel that way.
Yeah.
I remember coming into a doctor's office last year. I never saw that receptionist before in my life, right? And as soon as I saw her, I did not like her. And it bothered me. What do I want from this moment? Why don't I like her? It took me a few minutes to think. She reminded me of my fifth-grade teacher, right? So sometimes resentments are things that have been hanging around in our unconscious minds for years, and it causes us to have feelings that we don't understand why.
I remember you're absolutely right about that. I remember when I had that resentment for my mother. Every woman that I got involved with, because I was trying to get away from my mother, I didn't want a woman who was like her. Every woman I got involved with was just like my mother. It's like I couldn't get away from that spirit until I forgave my mother. Then I became attracted to different types of women.
Right.
And so it's like you become attracted to what you hate.
You know, one of the things I wrote in my book about forgiveness is some of the kinds of mechanisms that the subconscious mind uses. And because of subconscious, we're not aware of them. And we can be misled to have some pretty weird feelings, right, which to the subconscious makes sense, but to the conscious mind, to our awareness, seems ridiculous.
Lots of folks are taking antidepressant medication and, alcohol and drugs and trying to suppress that anger or live with it without going out of control. What would you say to those people?
Well, first of all, let me say that it's important that we have to understand the difference between medications. Alcohol and tranquilizers are chemicals that will numb the brain so that you don't feel, and that is not too good an idea. Antidepressants sometimes are overprescribed, but if they are prescribed properly for certain conditions, I think they can be very useful, but they won't help anybody really get rid of resentments. Antidepressants are effective when the feeling of depression or the other symptom is due to some kind of chemical change within the body that causes these symptoms. So, for example, if someone loses a husband or wife or a child and they have grief and they're depressed, antidepressants won't do a thing for them because they don't have a chemical change within the body causing those feelings. It is genuine grief. But there are so many times when there are these chemical changes within the body and from a variety of causes, and then antidepressants work. But to numb the brain regularly, particularly, is like taking and hitting yourself over the head with a sledgehammer in order not to feel the emotional pain. And that's a foolish thing to do.
888-775-3773. Quick break. Back in a moment. We're going to tell you how to get the doctor's books.
I know exactly how lucky I am.
Talking about forgiveness, Hollywood Update is coming up at the top of the hour with Kelly. And Patrick Rooney will be here in the third hour today. Behind the headlines, one of the smartest white men on this side of heaven, he will be here. Gotta forgive, folks. We're talking about forgiveness, resentment, anger with Dr. Abraham Twerski. And Doctor, you have written several or many books. And I especially like the one on forgiveness, Don't Let Resentment Hold You Captive. How can people get your books?
Well, I think the easiest way is to go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, or to the publisher, which is Art Scroll Publications, or Mesora, M-E-S-O-R-A-H. Those are the publishers. You can get them from them anyway.
I know for a fact that forgiveness is the key to freedom because you let yourself go free rather than trying to hold on to it to punish someone else. Is it necessary, in order to forgive or let go of resentment, is it necessary to go to the person and forgive, or can you do that without having to face the person?
No, I don't think that you... See, there I go back to the idea that forgiveness is not necessarily doing another person a favor. Now, if you want to tell that person, I forgive you, that's fine, but you don't have to. The important part of forgiveness is to get the resentment out of your own system, whether you let the other person or not know. Now, the person who says, I don't want to forgive him because he's a scoundrel, then don't tell him. Just get the hatred out of your heart so that you'll be free and that you can be able to sleep peacefully at night, and you don't have to tell the other person.
I read and I saw a YouTube video of you talking about anger, resentment, and forgiveness. And I read, in preparing for the show last night, I read that you were in your 80s. Is that true?
82, going strong.
That's amazing. What are you the original Abraham? How is that happening? You look well.
Well, I don't know of any other Abrahams, so there's a lot of Twerskis, but I'm not too familiar with too many Abrahams.
Did you have to overcome anger or resentment yourself?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, and it took me a long time. I didn't have too much problem overcoming the reactions to anger. That was relatively simple. But getting rid of resentments was another story. That took me a long time, and I must say that because even though I'm not an alcoholic, I joined the 12 Steps group of Alcoholics Anonymous because I found it so helpful in overcoming character defects. And working the 12-step program helped me overcome anger. It took me about 7 years.
Who did you have to forgive?
Well, there are a lot of kinds of time forgiveness. For example, I was terribly bullied as a kid, and it was a disaster. I must say that God gave me the chance to take revenge, and I was fortunate that I did not work on it. This bully who made my life miserable ended up being a patient in the hospital where I was an intern, and he was at my mercy. I could have killed him and gotten away with it, right? But instead, I took good care of him, and I forgave him. And later on, when we met, we embraced and we hugged, whatever. But so those painful memories went away.
Did you ever tell him about the way he had treated you?
No,
you never
I didn't
did.
think there was any purpose to it.
And did he remember you from the past?
Yeah, he remembered me. He thought he was my best friend.
Oh boy! And see,
And last time we met, he said to me, "Do you know, Abe?" He said, "If we would have held on to the comic books that we had, we both would be multimillionaires." Right? and he's right. You know, we had piles of comic books in the 1930s. Right?
Wow, that's amazing that he thought he was your best friend.
He thought he was my best friend.
And
right?
you had this resentment for him because he had bullied you so badly. He had not realized what he'd done to you.
Right.
And that's how it is, Doctor. A lot of people hold on to resentment toward others, and the people you're resenting, sometimes they don't even know it because they don't realize they have offended you.
Right. And that's why I said we ought to give him the benefit of the doubt, right? I don't know why he had to bully me. Maybe he had his own feelings of inadequacy and inferiority, and that this was his pathological way of dealing with them. So I was the victim, but I survived it.
You're a very wise man, Doctor. Thank you so much for coming on with me.
It's my pleasure.
I appreciate the work you're doing out there. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
All right, now. 888-7753-773. You got to forgive, folks. Back in a moment.
I gotta have a little fun. I gotta get up, get out of the house, hop in my ride and go downtown and have a beer. I'm tired of just sitting here